I spent 12 years paying my parents' mortgage to keep a roof over their heads when they faced foreclosure. So when I accidentally discovered their new will left the entire estate to my golden child brother, and nothing to me but their deepest gratitude, I did not scream or cry. I simply opened my banking app and canceled the automatic payments. 3 months later, my mother frantically texted me that the mortgage was due. I replied with just 3 words that set my family perfect facade completely on fire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stop funding the illusions of a toxic family. The bass from the backyard speakers rattled the window panes of my childhood home. It was our annual Juneteenth cookout, and my mother Vivian had pulled out all the stops to impress the neighborhood. The smell of hickory smoke and grilled ribs drifted through the thick summer air, mixing with the loud laughter of church aunties and uncles I only saw once a year. I am Maya, 35 years old, and a forensic accountant. While everyone else was outside dancing and holding plates piled high with potato salad, I was inside trying to fix a logistical issue. The caterer needed a physical signature on a revised invoice because my mother had doubled the dessert order at the last minute without telling anyone. Naturally, I was the one expected to handle the paperwork. I always handled the paperwork. I walked down the quiet hallway away from the noise of the party and pushed open the heavy oak door to my Father Calvin home office. The room was his sanctuary, lined with leather-bound books he never read and framed photographs of his past business successes. I just needed a pen. I walked over to his massive mahogany desk, scanning the clutter of golf magazines and mail. That was when I saw it. Resting right in the center of his desk was a thick legal envelope. The seal had been broken and the heavy parchment paper was pulled halfway out. The bold black lettering at the top caught my eye immediately. The Calvin and Vivian Family Trust and Last Will and Testament. I did not intend to snoop. As a forensic accountant, I look at highly confidential financial documents all day for a living. I respect boundaries, but my name caught my eye on the second page, which was lying face up. I froze. I leaned closer, resting my hands on the edge of the desk. The legal jargon was dense, but the distribution of assets was crystal clear. Upon their passing, the family home, all life insurance policies, and any remaining liquid assets were to be transferred entirely to my 38-year-old brother Jamal. My heart did a strange, heavy flutter against my ribs. I read the paragraph again, sure that I had missed a clause or a percentage allocation. But no, the entire estate was left to Jamal. I scanned down to the next section where my name was printed. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. To our daughter Maya, we leave our deepest gratitude for her assistance over the years. Gratitude. Just gratitude. I stood up straight, the air suddenly feeling thin and hard to breathe in the air-conditioned room. I walked slowly over to the large bay window that overlooked the driveway. Outside, the party was in full swing. Through the glass, I had a perfect view of Jamal and his white wife Chloe. They were standing next to a gleaming brand-new Range Rover. Chloe was tossing her perfectly highlighted blonde hair, laughing loudly at something one of my uncles said, while she absent-mindedly polished a smudge off the expensive vehicle. Jamal was leaning against the hood wearing a designer linen shirt holding court like a conquering king. A few feet away, my mother Vivian was holding a plastic cup of sweet tea, gesturing dramatically toward Jamal. Even through the double-paned glass, I could read her lips and catch fragments of her loud, bragging voice. She was telling the church aunties all about Jamal's incredible investments. She was praising his financial genius, his business acumen, and the wonderful legacy he and Chloe were going to build for the family name. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The truth burned like acid in my throat. 12 years ago, my father Calvin contracting business went bankrupt. I had just graduated with my master's degree and landed my first entry-level accounting job. I remember the exact Tuesday evening I came home to find my father sitting at the kitchen table crying over a foreclosure notice. They were 24 hours away from losing this very house. This large multi-level suburban home that they absolutely did not need but refused to sell because Vivian could not bear the social embarrassment of downsizing. Jamal was 26 at the time, too busy finding himself and jumping between failed business ideas to contribute a single dime. So I stepped up. I took over the mortgage. For 12 long years, I paid $2,500 every single month without fail. That is $360,000 of my own hard-earned money poured into keeping a roof over my parents' heads. I drove a beat-up sedan while my peers bought nice cars. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, delaying my own dreams of home ownership and putting my dating life on hold to ensure my parents never had to face the humiliation of eviction. I sacrificed my 20s to be their safety net. And Jamal. Jamal had never paid a utility bill in his life. He had received a massive down payment for his first condo from my parents, right before they went broke, and he never looked back to help them when times got tough. Yet here they were, legally handing him the very house I had paid for. They were securing his future using my money, while leaving me with nothing but a patronizing sentence of gratitude. I watched Chloe kiss Jamal on the cheek, pointing to the shiny wheels of their new car. The car they probably bought using the money they saved by never having to support our parents. I watched my mother look at Jamal with absolute adoration, completely ignoring the fact that the only reason they had a driveway to park that car in was because of my monthly sacrifice. Any other woman might have stormed out to the driveway right then. They might have screamed and cried and demanded answers in front of the entire neighborhood. They might have thrown that heavy parchment will right into the middle of the potato salad and let the family facade burn to the ground publicly. But I am not an impulsive woman. My career requires a cool head, an eye for detail, and the patience to let a fraudster hang themselves with their own rope. I turned away from the window and walked back to my father's desk. I did not touch the will. I left it exactly as I found it, perfectly positioned in its envelope. I picked up a pen from the cup holder, signed the caterer invoice with a steady hand, and took my phone out of my pocket. I unlocked the screen and opened my banking app. I navigated to the Scheduled Transfers tab. There, sitting at the top of the list, was the automatic payment titled Mom and Dad Mortgage. It was scheduled to deduct $2,500 on the 1st of next month, just as it had for the last 144 months. I stared at the bold green toggle switch. My parents assumed I would always be the reliable workhorse. They assumed my loyalty was a bottomless well they could draw from while saving their real wealth for the golden sun. They thought they could secure their patriarchal legacy behind my back while I quietly funded their present. I took a slow, deep breath. I pressed the toggle switch. The screen prompted me to confirm the cancellation of the recurring transfer. It warned me that stopping this payment might result in late fees or default for the receiving account. I did not hesitate. I hit confirm. The transfer vanished from the screen. Just like that, the financial life support I had provided for over a decade was severed. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, picked up the signed invoice, and walked out of the office. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing their fate. I walked back out into the blazing summer heat, pasting a polite smile on my face as I handed the invoice to the caterer. I grabbed a plate of barbecue and watched my family laugh and celebrate, completely unaware that the clock had just started ticking. The countdown to their reality check had officially begun. The first of the month came and went. For the first time in 12 years, my bank account did not experience the massive drain of $2,500. Then the 15th arrived. The grace period for the mortgage expired. I sat in my quiet apartment sipping my morning coffee and watched the calendar pages turn. Following the mortgage, I stopped the automatic payments for the property taxes, the water, the electricity, and the high-speed internet my brother Jamal insisted they needed for his occasional visits. I said absolutely nothing. I attended 2 Sunday dinners during those 60 days. I sat at the dining room table, eating my mother roast chicken while watching them operate in complete oblivion. My father, Calvin, complained about local politics. Jamal bragged about his cryptocurrency portfolio. My mother, Vivian, hovered over Chloe, treating her pregnant daughter-in-law like fragile royalty. Nobody mentioned the bills. They did not even know they were missing payments. For over a decade, my parents had simply forwarded all mail with a window envelope into a decorative wooden box in the hallway. They assumed I was still logging into their portals and clearing the balances just like the dutiful workhorse I had always been. I noticed the red past due notices peeking out from under the lid of that wooden box during my last visit. Calvin walked right past it, adjusting his expensive golf shirt, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was legally dissolving. The silence was my armor. Every day that passed without a word from them confirmed what I already knew. They did not care about my financial well-being. They only cared that the machine of their lifestyle kept running smoothly. But a machine requires fuel, and I had finally cut the supply. The silence broke on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my corner office at the forensic accounting firm, deep into a complex corporate embezzlement case. I was tracing hidden offshore assets for a client, piecing together a puzzle of corporate greed. My desk phone was quiet, but my personal cell phone buzzed violently against the glass desktop. The caller identification displayed Vivian. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I placed the phone to my ear, and before I could even offer a greeting, her voice came through, loud and demanding. Maya, I need you to wire $5,000 to the event planner by 3 o'clock today. There was no hello. There was no inquiry about my day or my health. Just an immediate expectation of funds. I kept my eyes on my computer monitors, watching lines of financial data scroll past. What event planner? I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat. For Chloe, luxury baby shower. Vivian said, her tone dripping with impatience. We are hosting it at the Botanical Gardens, and the caterer requires a 50% deposit today to secure the ice sculpture and the imported seafood station. It is going to be the event of the season, Maya. The entire congregation is invited. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. And why exactly are you calling me for this, Vivian? She huffed a loud sigh of exasperation into the receiver. Because Jamal Capital is currently tied up in high-yield assets. He is making major moves in the market, Maya. You know how investments work. He cannot just liquidate funds for a party. It makes terrible financial sense for him to pull money out right now when you have plenty of liquid cash sitting around doing nothing. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. Jamal was allegedly a financial genius making major moves, yet he could not afford to pay for his own child baby shower. My mother was demanding I fund an extravagant party to celebrate the very people who were secretly inheriting everything I had paid for. She expected me to buy imported seafood and ice sculptures for the woman who looked down on me, while my brother hoarded his imaginary wealth. For the first time in my 35 years of existence, I did not try to negotiate. I did not offer a smaller amount. I did not make an excuse about my own expenses. I simply spoke a single word. No. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the sound of a universe shifting on its axis. For a moment I thought the call had dropped. Excuse me, Vivian finally said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I said no. I am not paying $5,000 for Chloe baby shower. I am not paying for ice sculptures or catering. You and Jamal will have to figure it out. Maya, you listen to me right now. Vivian's voice escalated from a whisper to a furious shriek. You do not get to say no to family. This is your first nephew. This is the continuation of our family legacy. Jamal is building an empire and he needs our support. Then support him with your own money, Mom, I replied calmly. The calm in my voice seemed to ignite something vicious inside her. The mask of the polite suburban mother fell away, completely revealing the bitter entitlement underneath. You are just jealous, Vivian snarled. You are a bitter 35-year-old single woman sitting alone in an office. You are jealous because Chloe is young and beautiful and giving this family a son. You are jealous because Jamal is successful and building a real life while you have nothing but your spreadsheets. You should be honored to contribute to this child. It is the closest thing to a real family you will ever have. Her words were designed to cut me to the bone. They were the exact insecurities she had spent my entire life installing in my mind. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to cave under the weight of her cruelty and open my wallet just to buy back a fraction of her conditional love. But I did not feel hurt. I felt nothing but a cold, calculating clarity. I realized she actually believed everything she was saying. She truly believed I was a pathetic, lonely creature whose only purpose was to finance her golden son perfect life. She had no idea who she was actually speaking to. Have a wonderful shower, Vivian, I said. I pressed the red button on my screen, disconnecting the call. I did not block her number. I placed the phone face down on my desk. My heart was not racing. My hands were perfectly steady. I turned my attention back to the embezzlement case on my monitors. I felt incredibly light, as if a concrete vault had been lifted off my chest. 12 years of emotional extortion had ended with a single syllable. I worked in complete focus for another hour. I traced stolen funds through 3 different shell companies, finding immense satisfaction in exposing the truth hidden beneath layers of lies. I was good at my job. I was an expert at finding exactly what people were trying to hide. Then the secondary monitor on my right suddenly flashed. A sharp chime echoed from my computer speakers. It was not a work email or a client message. It was a notification from my personal specialized financial monitoring software. As a forensic accountant, I have access to sophisticated tracking tools. I keep comprehensive alerts set up on all major credit bureaus and property title registries. Specifically, I have an ironclad monitoring system locked onto the exact address of my parents' home. I clicked the notification, opening the alert portal. A red banner stretched across the top of the screen, indicating high-priority activity. I read the detailed report and my eyes narrowed. Someone had just initiated a hard credit pull, heavily utilizing the property address and Calvin's Social Security number. The inquiry was generated by a major commercial lending institution, the type of institution that deals strictly in high-value business loans and equity lines of credit. I quickly cross-referenced the inquiry details. The amount associated with the preliminary loan application was massive. Jamal was not just trying to get a small personal loan, he was initiating a massive financial move to secure commercial funding. And to do it, he was attempting to leverage the perceived equity of the family estate. The estate he believed he was inheriting free and clear. The estate he believed Calvin and Vivian owned outright. I leaned in close to the screen, reading the timestamp of the credit pull. It had happened exactly 10 minutes after I hung up on Vivian. Jamal was panicking. His high-yield assets were clearly a complete fabrication. He was broke, and he was desperately trying to use the house as collateral to keep his house of cards from collapsing. He thought he was making a brilliant corporate play. He thought he was untouchable. He had absolutely no idea that he had just walked right into a trap that had been waiting for 12 years. I saved a copy of the credit inquiry report to my encrypted drive and smiled at the screen. The silent phase was officially over. Jamal had just handed me the match to burn their illusions to the ground. Let the games begin. Month 3 arrived exactly as I predicted. The bank standard grace period evaporated into thin air. I knew from my professional experience that the lender's automated systems would have triggered the final warnings, sending certified letters directly to the property my parents occupied. I was sitting at my kitchen island, enjoying a quiet Saturday morning with a fresh cup of coffee, when the screen of my phone illuminated. It was a text message from Vivian. There was no greeting. There was no inquiry about my weekend or my health. There was not even a passive-aggressive pleasantry to soften the blow. The message consisted of 4 words typed entirely in capital letters. The mortgage is due. I stared at the glowing letters on my screen. 12 years of complete financial sacrifice on my part, and this was how she communicated with me. Like a bill collector, like a master demanding tribute from a servant. For a fleeting second, the old Maya, the dutiful daughter who desperately craved her mother approval, felt a familiar spike of anxiety. But that woman had died in Calvin home office exactly 90 days ago. The new Maya felt nothing but a cold, profound sense of power. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. I picked up the phone and opened the keyboard. I did not write a paragraph explaining my feelings. I did not ask why they were treating me this way. I simply typed 3 words and pressed send. Ask the heir. I placed the phone face up on the counter, and watched the chaos unfold in real time. It took exactly 45 seconds for the implication of those 3 words to register. Then my phone erupted. The screen flashed with an incoming call from Vivian. I let it ring out. 2 seconds later, another call from Vivian. Ignored. Then a text message from Jamal demanding to know what kind of game I was playing. Then a call from Jamal. The notifications piled up one after another, creating a frantic digital panic attack. They were losing control and they knew it. I silenced the ringer and went back to my coffee, watching the missed calls counter climb into the double digits. I let them sweat for 3 hours. I cleaned my apartment. I watered my plants. I took a long, hot shower. When I finally picked up my phone again, I saw a voicemail notification from Calvin. My father never called me unless someone was dead or he needed someone to yell at. I tapped the icon and brought the speaker to my ear. His voice boomed through the tiny speaker, dripping with patriarchal authority and barely contained rage. Maya, you will come to the house immediately for an urgent family meeting. We are done playing these childish games. You get over here right now and explain yourself. He did not ask. He commanded. He spoke to me with the exact same tone he used to reprimand insubordinate employees back when his contracting business was still afloat. He still believed he was the king of a castle I was paying for. I walked into my bedroom and went straight to my closet. I dressed intentionally. I bypassed the casual weekend wear and pulled out a sharp-tailored navy blue business suit. I paired it with my most expensive leather heels. I was not going to this house as their obedient daughter. I was going as the forensic accountant who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. I grabbed my designer tote bag, double-checking that the heavy leather-bound legal binder was resting securely inside. The drive to my childhood home was surreal. For over a decade, making this drive filled me with a heavy sense of dread. I would usually be arriving to fix a problem, balance a checkbook, or endure Vivian's subtle insults about my weight or my single status. Today, I drove the speed limit, listening to a classical music station, feeling completely untethered from their toxic hold. I pulled into the driveway and parked right behind Jamal's new Range Rover. The expensive vehicle looked absurdly out of place, parked on the cracked concrete of a house facing imminent foreclosure. I stepped out of my car, smoothed my jacket, and walked up the front steps. I did not bother to knock. I turned the handle and walked inside. The air in the living room was thick with tension. They had arranged themselves like a tribunal waiting to pass judgment on a traitor. Calvin sat in his oversized leather recliner, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw set in a hard line. Vivian perched on the edge of the floral sofa, clutching a tissue she did not need, playing the role of the distressed matriarch. Jamal lounged against the fireplace mantel, trying to project an air of bored indifference, but the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead betrayed his anxiety. Chloe sat near Vivian, scrolling mindlessly on her phone, looking deeply annoyed that her Saturday had been interrupted by family drama. None of them stood to greet me. None of them offered me a seat. I walked to the center of the room and stood my ground, clutching my tote bag. The silence stretched out heavy and oppressive. They were waiting for me to apologize. They were waiting for me to crumble under their collective disapproval and beg for forgiveness. I simply looked at each of them, offering a polite, empty smile. "You took your time getting here," Calvin barked, his deep voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We have been waiting for hours." "I was enjoying my morning," I replied evenly, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "You said it was urgent. I am here. What is the problem?" Calvin uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. He snatched a piece of paper off the glass coffee table and practically threw it in my direction. It fluttered to the floor, landing near my expensive leather shoes. I did not bend down to pick it up. I already knew exactly what it was. I could see the bold red banner printed across the top of the heavy stock paper. It was the official 90-day warning of foreclosure from the lending institution. "Care to explain what this is?" Maya, Calvin demanded, his face flushing with anger. "I went to check the mail this morning and found this garbage mixed in with the utility bills. The bank is claiming we are 3 months behind on the mortgage. They are threatening to initiate foreclosure proceedings." "Why did your automatic payments stop?" Vivian chimed in, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. The bank called the house Maya. They called the landline and left a message about default. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? What if the neighbors heard? What if the church congregation finds out we are receiving collection calls? You have put this entire family in a terrible position because you forgot to balance your checking account. Jamal let out a loud, dramatic sigh from the fireplace. Seriously, Maya, you had one job to do, one simple monthly transfer. If you were having money problems, you should have just been honest, instead of letting it get to this point. Now Dad has to deal with a red mark on his credit because you cannot manage your finances properly. Chloe finally looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes. It is honestly so toxic to just stop paying a bill without telling anyone. We have a baby on the way, and we do not need this kind of negative energy in our lives right now. You need to fix this today, Maya. Jamal has too much on his plate to be cleaning up your messes. I stood there letting their ridiculous accusations wash over me. For 12 years I had funded their lives, and the second the money stopped, they immediately branded me as incompetent, selfish, and toxic. They did not ask if I had lost my job. They did not ask if I was experiencing a medical emergency. Their only concern was that the free ride had hit a speed bump. I looked at the bright red foreclosure notice resting on the carpet. Then I looked up and met my father's furious gaze. I did not forget to balance my checking account, I said, my voice dropping to a cool, measured pitch that commanded the room. I did not experience a financial hardship, and I certainly did not forget to make the transfer. I canceled the payments intentionally, exactly 90 days ago. Calvin gripped the arms of his recliner, his knuckles turning white. You did what? Why in God's name would you do something so reckless and stupid? You know we rely on that transfer to keep this house afloat. I offered them a slow, genuine smile, the kind of smile that sends a shiver down the spine. Because I needed a pen for the caterer at the Juneteenth cookout, I said, smoothly holding Calvin's stare. I went into your office to find one, and I read the will. The silence that followed my revelation was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating silence that seemed to suck all the oxygen right out of the room. I watched my father Calvin perfectly still. I watched his face transition from a deep shade of angry crimson to a pale, sickly gray. He knew what he had written in that document. He knew the depths of his own betrayal. For a fraction of a second, I actually expected an apology. I expected a moment of shame or a desperate attempt to explain away the cruelty of leaving the daughter who saved him entirely out of his legacy. But I had forgotten the cardinal rule of dealing with narcissists. They never apologize. They pivot. They deflect. They attack. It was Vivian who broke the silence. She did not look ashamed. She looked deeply offended. She stood up from the edge of the floral sofa, smoothing her skirt with an aggressive, jerky motion. She looked at me not with the eyes of a mother caught betraying her child, but with the eyes of a judge sentencing a criminal. You invaded our privacy! Vivian snapped, her voice echoing sharply against the vaulted ceilings. You went snooping through your father's private office, and you are throwing a tantrum over things you do not understand. You have no right to question how we distribute our assets. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone perfectly level. My assets, Vivian. For the last 144 months, they have been my assets, keeping a roof over your head. I paid the mortgage. I paid the property taxes. I paid the insurance. You are giving Jamal a house that I bought. Vivian scoffed, waving her hand in the air as if batting away an annoying insect. You helped out Maya. Families help each other out during hard times. But that does not mean you get to dictate the family legacy. This house is a man's birthright. Jamal is the son. He carries the family name. He is the head of his household, and it is our duty to ensure he has a solid foundation to build his empire. You are a woman. You will find a husband. You will marry into another family, and your husband will provide a home for you. It is your duty to support your brother's legacy until you leave to start your own. I stared at her. I watched her mouth move. I watched the woman who gave birth to me explain why I did not matter. I watched my mother erase 12 years of my financial bleeding with a wave of her manicured hand. I watched her justify the theft of my youth, my savings, and my future, all to prop up a man who had never done a hard day of work in his life. Are you actually listening to yourself? I asked. You are telling me that my duty was to be your human checkbook until I found a man to replace you as my financial burden. You are telling me that Jamal deserves the wealth I built simply because he was born male. It is the natural order of things. Vivian shot back, her chin raised in arrogant defiance. You have always been so difficult, Maya. Always competing with your brother. Always trying to prove you are smarter or more successful. But Jamal is the man of the house now that your father is retiring. It is only right that the estate goes to him. You should be happy for him. You should be proud to have contributed to his future. Jamal pushed himself off the fireplace mantel. He did not look guilty. He looked profoundly annoyed that he had to deal with me at all. He shot his cuffs pulling at the sleeves of his expensive designer shirt. Then he slowly, deliberately adjusted the heavy gold watch on his left wrist. I recognized the brand immediately. It was a timepiece that cost more than 6 months of the mortgage payments I had been making for him. Maya, you need to stop this right now, Jamal said, using the patronizing tone of a disappointed parent scolding a toddler. You are making a massive deal out of a standard estate planning procedure. Mom and Dad made a traditional choice. You are letting your emotions cloud your judgment. You are throwing a tantrum over money, and it is frankly embarrassing to watch. A tantrum. I had poured over $300,000 into their survival, and my refusal to continue being extorted was being labeled a tantrum. You are right, Jamal, I replied, my voice dropping to a near whisper. It is just money. So since you are the heir and the man of the house, you should have absolutely no problem paying the past due balance. It is only $7,500 plus late fees. I am sure you can cover that out of your checking account today. Jamal's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the first sign of actual discomfort cracking his arrogant facade. You know my capital is tied up, Maya. I am an entrepreneur. My money is working in the market. I cannot just liquidate high-yield assets because you decided to have an emotional breakdown and skip a few bill payments. You need to act like an adult and fulfill your obligations. Before I could tear into the absolute absurdity of his statement, Chloe decided to enter the fray. She uncrossed her long legs and set her glass of sparkling water on a coaster with a sharp, clinking sound. She looked at me with an expression of deep, condescending pity. Maya, I am going to be totally honest with you, Chloe said, using a soft, therapeutic voice that grated against my nerves. Your energy right now is incredibly toxic. You are bringing all this hostility and resentment into our safe space, and it is really bad for the baby. We are trying to cultivate a positive environment for your future nephew, and you are trying to manipulate us with money. It is a classic sign of financial abuse. Financial abuse. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing at the sheer psychological projection happening in this room. If you do not resume the payments and fix this issue with the bank today, Chloe continued, her voice gaining a sharp, threatening edge, we are going to have to set some serious boundaries. We cannot have this kind of toxicity around our child. If you want to be an aunt, if you want to have any relationship with our son, you need to apologize to your parents and get this mortgage current. We will not allow you in our lives if you are going to be this selfish. I looked at the four of them. They had built an entire alternate reality. In their minds, I was the villain. I was the abusive, toxic, ungrateful daughter holding them hostage. They literally viewed me as a utility company. If I stopped providing the service, I was cut off from the family. They were using an unborn child to extort me into paying for the very house they were planning to steal from under me. I am not paying another cent, I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. The bank grace period is over. You are in default. You can either pay it yourselves, or you can pack your bags. Jamal lost his temper. The cool, detached entrepreneur routine vanished completely. He stepped forward, his face contorting into an ugly sneer. You stupid, bitter woman! Jamal shouted, pointing a finger directly at my face. You do not understand what you are doing. You are ruining my entire timeline. I need this mortgage current today. Your timeline? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, my timeline, Jamal snapped, running a hand over his face in frustration. I have a massive deal closing by the end of the month. I am launching a new crypto startup and I need serious capital. I am using the house as collateral for a $1.5 million business loan. The lender ran a credit check, and they need a clean 90-day payment history on the primary mortgage before they release the funds. You stopping the payments just threw a wrench in a multi-million-dollar deal. Vivian nodded vigorously, standing right behind her golden son. Jamal is going to be incredibly wealthy, Maya. He is going to take care of all of us. But he needs this loan to start the company. We agreed to let him leverage the estate. You just need to pay the past due balance so the bank will clear his business loan. Once he is a millionaire, he will pay you back. I stood perfectly still. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together in my mind, forming a picture of financial illiteracy so profound it was almost beautiful. Jamal was trying to take out a second mortgage, a massive equity line of credit on a house that was 90 days past due. He was trying to leverage property that he did not even own yet, and he thought the only thing standing in his way was a missed payment. He was trying to explain high-level finance to a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering corporate fraud. I stared at him, letting the absolute absurdity of his plan wash over me. I looked at my mother, who was nodding along with his financial fantasy. I looked at my father, who had built this house of cards and expected me to be the concrete foundation. I looked at Chloe, who was already spending the imaginary $1 million in her head. I had spent 12 years holding my breath, terrified of upsetting the delicate balance of this family. I had spent 12 years putting their needs above my own safety, above my own future, above my own peace of mind. I had paid. I paid while he played. I paid while they praised him. I paid while they planned to leave me with nothing. But the bill had finally come due. I looked at my brother. I looked at his expensive watch, his designer shirt, and the sheer unadulterated arrogance in his eyes. I let the silence stretch out, allowing his words to hang in the stale air of the living room. I reached into my designer tote bag, feeling the heavy leather-bound legal binder waiting in the darkness. I prepared to drop the single piece of information that would destroy his entire world. You are using the house to secure a $1.5 million loan, I stated, repeating his words slowly to make sure everyone in the room heard them clearly. You are borrowing against the equity in this estate. That is exactly what I just said, Maya Jamal sneered, rolling his eyes. It is basic finance. Not that a glorified bookkeeper like you would understand how real wealth is generated. Now are you going to wire the money to the bank, or do I have to get Dad lawyer involved? I smiled. I tilted my head slightly, looking him dead in the eye. What equity? The silence in the living room was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating silence that seemed to suck all the oxygen right out of the room. I watched my father Calvin sit perfectly still in his oversized recliner. I watched his face transition from a deep shade of angry crimson to a pale, sickly gray. He knew what he had written in that document. He knew the depths of his own betrayal, but his patriarchal arrogance would not allow him to immediately process the threat I had just introduced. Jamal was the first to attempt to break the tension. He let out a sharp, nervous laugh and uncrossed his arms. He took 2 steps toward me, trying to use his physical height to re-establish his dominance in the room. What do you mean, what equity? Jamal scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. I am talking about the $1.2 million this property is currently appraised at. The house is paid off, Maya. Dad and Mom own it free and clear. It is a prime asset. I am simply unlocking its potential to fund my company. You would understand that if you actually built wealth instead of just counting other people's money all day. I did not back away from him. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked on his face while I slowly unzipped my designer tote bag. I reached inside and grasped the cool, heavy spine of the legal binder I had prepared specifically for this moment. I pulled it out and dropped it onto the center of the glass coffee table. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Calvin jumped slightly in his chair. Vivian let out a small, startled gasp. Chloe stopped looking at her phone entirely and sat up straight. You do not own a single square inch of this property, Jamal. I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. And neither do Calvin and Vivian. Calvin leaned forward, his face twisting into a furious scowl. What kind of nonsense are you spewing now, Maya? I bought this house 30 years ago. I have the original deed in my filing cabinet. You are standing in my living room, and you will speak to me with respect. I reached forward and flipped open the thick leather cover of the binder. I bypassed the first few sections of financial tracing and went straight to the property records. I slid a heavily notarized document across the glass table until it rested directly in front of Calvin. You bought this house 30 years ago, Dad, I said, speaking slowly and clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. But you lost it 12 years ago. You seem to have convenient amnesia about the bankruptcy. Do you remember the Tuesday night I came home and found you crying at the kitchen table over a foreclosure notice? Do you remember how the original lender was exactly 24 hours away from locking you out and auctioning this property to the highest bidder? Vivian's face flushed a deep, humiliating red. We do not speak about that time, Maya. That was a temporary setback. Your father negotiated a brilliant restructuring deal with a private corporate lender. He saved this family. He kept a roof over our heads. I let out a short, bitter laugh. He did not negotiate anything, Vivian. He was desperate and terrified of losing his country club status. When the private corporate lender miraculously appeared at the 11th hour, offering to buy the distressed debt and restructure the mortgage, Calvin was so arrogant and so relieved that he signed the paperwork without even reading the fine print. He just saw a lifeline and he took it. I slid another document across the glass table. It was the original restructuring agreement from 12 years ago, bearing my father's signature. The lender was a private asset management company called Apex Holdings. I continued tapping my manicured fingernail against the corporate letterhead. They purchased your distressed mortgage note for pennies on the dollar. They paid off your original bank. They assumed the primary lien on this estate. They became the legal owners of your debt. Jamal snatched the paper off the table, his eyes darting back and forth as he scanned the legal jargon. Okay, so what? Dad has been paying Apex Holdings back for 12 years. The debt has to be practically zero by now. That is why I can leverage the remaining equity. I looked at my golden child brother and smiled. The sheer financial illiteracy in his statement was staggering. Dad has not paid a single dime to Apex Holdings in 12 years, Jamal, I said, because Dad went completely broke. The only reason Apex Holdings did not immediately foreclose on this property 12 years ago was because a highly motivated third party stepped in and set up an automatic monthly transfer of $2,500 to service the debt and keep the property taxes current. Chloe frowned, her perfectly manicured brow furrowing in confusion. I do not understand. If Calvin was not paying the corporate lender, then who was making the transfers? I was making the transfers, Chloe, I replied, turning my gaze to her. I sacrificed my 20s. I lived in a tiny studio apartment. I drove a beat-up car. I funneled $360,000 of my own hard-earned salary into Apex Holdings to keep this family from being thrown out onto the street. Calvin slammed his hand down on the armrest of his recliner. Then you did your duty as a daughter. You helped your family in a time of need. But that does not change the fact that this house belongs to me and your mother. Once the debt is cleared, the deed remains in my name. And I have chosen to leave that deed to Jamal. You have absolutely no right to interfere with my estate planning. I took a deep breath, letting the sweet taste of absolute victory fill my lungs. You really did not read the fine print, Calvin, I said, shaking my head in mock sympathy. Let me explain exactly how a blind limited liability company works. As a forensic accountant, I specialize in creating completely untraceable corporate entities for high net worth clients. 12 years ago, when you were 24 hours away from losing everything, I used my professional expertise to create Apex Holdings. I registered it in Delaware. I shielded the ownership through layers of corporate anonymity. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Jamal dropped the paper onto the table, taking a step back, as if the document had burned him. Vivian brought a trembling hand to her mouth. I am Apex Holdings. I stated the words, slicing through their delusions like a scalpel. I bought your distressed debt. I own the paper on this house. For 12 years, I have been paying myself every single month to service the property taxes and maintain the illusion that you still owned a mansion. I am the primary lien holder. I am the bank. Jamal's face went completely slack. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish suffocating on dry land. You own the debt. I own everything, Jamal, I said, taking a step toward him. That $1.5 million business loan you are trying to secure for your little crypto startup. It triggered a hard credit pull. The commercial lender looked into the property records to verify your collateral. They found a massive primary lien held by Apex Holdings. They realized you have zero equity. They realized you are broke. That is why your timeline is ruined. Your loan is dead in the water. Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical gasp. Jamal, is this true? Tell me she is lying, Jamal. You told me we were securing $1 million today. You told me the baby shower was going to be fine. You promised me a new house in the hills. Jamal ignored her, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. You set us up. You planned this from the very beginning. You tricked Dad into signing away his house so you could steal it from me. I did not steal anything, Jamal. I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I saved this family from public humiliation. I kept you all living in luxury while I paid the price. I intended to keep the arrangement going indefinitely. I intended to let Mom and Dad live out their final years in comfort. But then I walked into that office to find a pen. I saw the will. I saw that Calvin and Vivian had legally decided to take the asset I paid for and hand it entirely to you, leaving me with nothing but their deepest gratitude. Vivian burst into tears, real tears of absolute panic. Maya, please. You are our daughter. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. A house is just a building. Family is forever. You must sign the deed over to Jamal. It is the only way to save his business. It is the only way to protect your new nephew. You cannot destroy us over a piece of paper. I turned to my mother, immune to her emotional manipulation. I am not destroying you, Vivian, I said. You destroyed yourselves when you decided my only value was as a human checkbook. I stopped the automatic transfers exactly 90 days ago. I deliberately let the account fall into arrears. I pointed to the bright red warning letter Calvin had thrown on the floor. That notice did not come from a random bank. It came from my firm. You are officially 90 days late on your payments to Apex Holdings. According to the strict terms of the restructuring agreement Calvin signed 12 years ago, a 90-day default triggers an immediate reversion of the asset. The grace period is over. You are in default. To me. I reached into the binder and pulled out the final document. It was a formal eviction notice. I placed it gently on top of the glass coffee table right next to the forged legacy they had tried to build on my back. I am foreclosing on the property, I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. You have 30 days to vacate my house. Jamal stood completely paralyzed. The arrogant swagger, the expensive watch, the designer shirt. It all suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume draped over a terrified child. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. The absolute finality of my statement hung in the air, a guillotine waiting to drop. You are lying. Jamal finally choked out, his voice thin and reedy. You cannot just secretly buy a mortgage. That is illegal. You have to notify the homeowner. I did notify the homeowner, Jamal. I replied smoothly, tapping the legal binder. Apex Holdings sent a certified letter to this address 12 years ago detailing the transfer of the debt. It was standard procedure. I just happened to know that Vivian forwards all official-looking mail into that wooden box in the hallway without reading it. Calvin's face had drained of all color. He looked from me to the binder and back again. The reality of his situation was crashing down around him. 30 years of patriarchal dominance shattered by a single signature he had not bothered to read. This cannot be right, Calvin whispered, sinking deeper into his recliner. My lawyer reviewed the restructuring agreement. He said it was a standard corporate bailout. Your lawyer was a real estate buddy you met at the country club, Dad. I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. He skimmed the first page and billed you $2,000. He missed the clause explicitly stating that Apex Holdings is a private entity with the right to foreclose upon any 90-day default. He missed the clause that transferred the primary lien. He missed everything. Vivian, who had been listening in a state of growing panic, suddenly rushed forward. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my jacket. "Maya, this is a misunderstanding," Vivian cried, her voice shrill with desperation. "You own the debt. That means you can just cancel the default. You can fix this right now. You just need to sign a piece of paper saying the house belongs to us. Or better yet, sign it over to Jamal. We can transfer the deed today and his loan will clear. Everything will be fine." I looked down at her hand. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers gripping my sleeve until she slowly released her hold. "I am not transferring anything, Vivian," I said coldly. "The grace period is over. The eviction notice stands." Jamal let out a strange, high-pitched sound. It was the sound of a man watching his entire life evaporate. He began pacing the floor, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "You do not understand," Maya Jamal babbled, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "You have to fix this. You have to sign the deed over to me right now, today. If that loan does not clear, I am dead. My timeline is ruined. Your timeline for a crypto startup." I asked, raising an eyebrow. "If the loan does not clear you, just delay the launch. It is inconvenient, but it is not a disaster." Jamal stopped pacing. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. A bead of sweat trickled down the side of his face. He looked at Calvin, then at Vivian, and finally at Chloe, who was still sitting on the sofa looking increasingly alarmed. "It is not just a delay," Jamal whispered, his voice cracking. "I already submitted the paperwork." The room went dead silent. Even Vivian stopped her frantic sniffling. I stared at my brother, my mind racing through the financial implications. As a forensic accountant, I analyze loan applications and corporate funding structures daily. A commercial lender does not just hand over $1.5 million based on a preliminary inquiry. They require extensive documentation. They require verifiable collateral. "You submitted the paperwork," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You submitted a formal commercial loan application using this house as collateral." Jamal nodded slowly, looking physically ill. "And you signed the disclosures?" I asked, taking a step toward him. "You legally attested that the collateral was unencumbered and owned by the guarantors." I had to. Jamal practically shouted, his panic finally boiling over. The investors were threatening to pull out. I needed the capital to secure the server farm. I told the bank the house was owned free and clear by Dad. I told them we had $1.2 million in equity. Calvin bolted upright out of his recliner. "You did what? You used my name on a commercial loan application without telling me." "I did tell you," Jamal shot back desperately, defending himself. "I told you I was leveraging the estate for the business. You said it was fine. You said the house was my birthright. I said you would inherit it when I die." Calvin roared, his face turning purple with rage. "I did not tell you to forge my signature on a federal banking document. I did not forge anything," Jamal stammered, backing away from our furious father. "I used the power of attorney you gave me last year for the estate planning. I signed the disclosures legally." I stood in the center of the room, calculating the massive legal nightmare my golden brother had just created. He had used a power of attorney to pledge an asset he did not own. He had lied to a commercial lending institution about the primary lien. He had committed textbook bank fraud. "But wait," I said, raising a hand to silence the shouting match between my father and brother. "A commercial lender does not release funds without verifying the title. They would have seen the Apex Holdings lien during underwriting. Unless—" I looked at Jamal, my eyes narrowing as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. "Unless you already took an advance," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Jamal flinched. He looked at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. "You took a bridge loan," I stated, connecting the dots with ruthless efficiency. "You used a secondary private lender. You showed them the preliminary application for the $1.5 million. You promised them the primary loan would clear within 30 days, and they gave you a short-term high-interest cash advance to cover your immediate expenses. Jamal slowly nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat. How much? I demanded. 300,000. Jamal mumbled, his voice barely audible. $300,000. The exact amount of money I had poured into this house over the last 12 years. He had borrowed it against a lie, and he had already spent it. Where is the money, Jamal? I asked, my voice echoing in the silent room. I needed to secure the servers, he repeated weakly. And the marketing firm. And the office lease downtown. The capital is gone, Maya. It is tied up in the business infrastructure. If the primary loan does not clear, the bridge lender will call the note. They will come after the house. They cannot come after the house, I replied coldly. Because I own the house. They will come after you, Jamal. You signed the personal guarantees. You committed the fraud. The sound of shattering glass cut through the tension. We all turned to see Chloe standing by the sofa. She had dropped her glass of sparkling water. It lay in pieces on the hardwood floor, water seeping into an expensive Persian rug. She was staring at Jamal with a look of absolute horror. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking. What did you just say? Chloe asked, her voice trembling. You took a $300,000 bridge loan. It is fine, baby, Jamal said, taking a hesitant step toward his pregnant wife. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. Once Maya signs the deed over to me, the primary loan will clear and we can pay off the advance. You signed a personal guarantee, Chloe screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. She stepped backward away from Jamal, as if he were carrying a contagious disease. What did you just sign my name to, Jamal? I did not sign your name, baby, Jamal pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. I just used our joint accounts as secondary proof of liquidity. You linked our joint accounts to a fraudulent commercial loan? Chloe shrieked, her face contorting with rage. Are you out of your mind? That is my money, Jamal. That is my inheritance from my grandmother. You linked my assets to a federal crime. Chloe. Baby, please. Jamal begged, taking another step toward her. We are a team. We are building an empire. Do not touch me, Chloe snapped, slapping his hands away. You are not building an empire. You are broke. You do not even own the car in the driveway, do you? Jamal looked away, unable to maintain eye contact. It is a lease, he mumbled. Chloe let out a sound that was half sob, half furious laugh. She looked at Vivian, who was standing frozen by the fireplace. She looked at Calvin, who was gripping the back of his recliner. Then she looked at me. She did not tell me I was toxic. She did not threaten to ban me from my nephew life. She looked at me with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. She finally realized that the entire Wilson family legacy was a carefully constructed mirage funded entirely by the woman she had just insulted. I am leaving, Chloe announced, her voice suddenly cold and decisive. Chloe, you cannot leave, Vivian cried, rushing forward. You are carrying my grandson. You are part of this family. I am not going to federal prison for your idiot son. Chloe spat, turning on her heel and marching toward the hallway. We heard her footsteps pounding up the stairs. We heard the sound of closet doors slamming and hangers rattling. Jamal stood frozen in the center of the living room, completely incapable of stopping the destruction of his life. 10 minutes later, Chloe reappeared. She was carrying a massive designer duffel bag and her car keys. She marched straight past Jamal without looking at him. She walked out the front door and let it slam shut behind her. A moment later, the heavy roar of the Range Rover engine echoed through the living room walls. The tires screeched on the concrete as she peeled out of the driveway, leaving Jamal and his imaginary empire in the dust. The silence returned to the living room, heavier and more toxic than before. Jamal finally broke. He collapsed onto the floral sofa, burying his face in his hands. He began to sob, deep, ugly, heaving sobs of absolute terror. Dad, you have to fix this, Jamal cried, looking up at Calvin with red-rimmed eyes. You have to call your lawyer. You have to find a loophole. If that bridge loan defaults, they are going to audit my entire financial history. They are going to see the forged disclosures. I am going to jail, Dad. Calvin stared at his golden son. the son he had groomed to take over his legacy, the son he had prioritized over my entire existence. Calvin looked at the sobbing, broken man on the sofa and finally saw him for exactly what he was. Calvin slowly turned his head and looked at me. He did not yell. He did not issue a command. He looked at me with the weary, defeated eyes of a man who realized he had backed the wrong horse for 30 years. Maya, Calvin said, his voice raspy and quiet. "Please, he is your brother." I did not respond. I simply stood there holding my legal binder, watching the patriarchal hierarchy of the Wilson family crumble into dust. Vivian suddenly rushed across the room. She threw her arms around my shoulders, pulling me into a desperate, suffocating hug. I stood perfectly rigid, refusing to return the embrace. "Maya, my brilliant, beautiful Maya." Vivian sobbed, her tears soaking through the shoulder of my expensive navy suit. "I always knew you were the smartest child. I always told your father you had a brilliant mind for business. You are the only one who can save us. You have to sign the deed over to Jamal. You have to save him, Maya. You cannot let them send your brother to federal prison. Please, Maya. You are our only hope." I slowly reached up and peeled Vivian's hands off my shoulders. I stepped backward, creating a physical distance between myself and her desperate performance. I looked at the three of them. My father defeated, my mother begging, my brother sobbing over the ruins of his stolen life. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice perfectly calm, ringing with the cold, hard truth of a balanced ledger. "The house is mine. The grace period is over. You have 30 days to pack." Vivian stood frozen with her arms still suspended in the empty air between us. The mask of the loving mother slipped entirely, revealing the ugly, panicked truth underneath. She let out a sharp, offended gasp and looked to Calvin, expecting him to rescue her from this sudden shift in power. Calvin did exactly what a cornered narcissist does when faced with the collapse of his reality. He went on the offensive. He pushed himself out of his recliner, ignoring the tremor in his hands and the sweat forming on his brow. He puffed out his chest, squaring his shoulders as he attempted to summon the patriarchal authority that had ruled this family for 3 decades. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my face. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little thief!" Calvin bellowed, his voice vibrating with rage. "You are not kicking us out of anywhere. I built this family. I gave you everything you have. You think you can just manipulate some corporate paperwork and steal my legacy. I will destroy you, Maya. I will drag you through the courts until you do not have a single penny left to your name." I maintained my silence, letting his empty threats bounce off my armor. His anger was a performance designed to cover his absolute lack of leverage. "I will sue you for elder financial abuse." Calvin continued, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You took advantage of an older man. You used your fancy accounting degree to trick your own father into signing away his property rights. I will call the district attorney. I will have you investigated for fraud. I will see you behind bars before I let you take Jamal's future away from him." Jamal suddenly looked up from the sofa, a flicker of desperate hope lighting his tear-stained face. "Yeah," Jamal chimed in, his voice shaking, but eager to jump on the bandwagon of blame. "Dad is right. You committed fraud, Maya. You tricked us into this. No judge is going to let you enforce a predatory loan against your own flesh and blood. You are going to go to jail." The sheer audacity of Jamal accusing me of fraud while he was sitting on a forged federal loan application was almost poetic. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not try to explain that 12 years ago I was the only person willing to save them from living in a motel. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket. I pulled out a sleek matte black business card and held it out toward Calvin. He glared at it, refusing to take it. I let it drop from my fingers. It landed on the glass coffee table, resting perfectly beside the eviction notice. "You are absolutely right to involve legal counsel, Calvin," I said, my tone perfectly level. "In fact, I highly encourage it. You should call the number on that card immediately. Her name is Tara Vance. She is my retaining attorney. She is a former federal prosecutor who specializes in prosecuting corporate malfeasance and financial fraud. She is eagerly waiting for your call." Calvin stared down at the black card as if it were a venomous snake. And just to be absolutely clear, I added, looking directly into my father's eyes, Tara does not negotiate emotional grievances. She prosecutes crimes. When you call her, be prepared to explain exactly how your signature ended up on Jamal commercial loan application. Be prepared to explain how a man with zero equity and a history of bank fraud managed to secure a $300,000 cash advance using an asset he does not actually own. Jamal let out a strangled whimper, sinking back into the cushions like a deflating balloon. I turned on my heel and walked toward the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, severing my connection to the Wilson family delusion. I walked down the brick driveway toward my car. The cool evening air felt incredibly clean in my lungs. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. The next 14 days were a masterclass in psychological unraveling. The silence from my end was absolute, while the noise from their end reached a fever pitch. My phone became a graveyard of frantic voicemails and desperate text messages. Vivian tried emotional blackmail. She sent long, rambling paragraphs about family unity, forgiveness, and how she was experiencing heart palpitations from the stress. She sent pictures of my childhood bedroom, asking how I could abandon the memories we built. Calvin alternated between blustering threats of legal action and quiet, defeated messages asking if we could just sit down at a diner like reasonable adults. Jamal was the most pathetic of all. He called from multiple burner numbers, leaving tearful messages begging for a second chance. He promised to pay me back every single cent if I would just clear the title so his primary loan could fund. He swore he would get a real job working in retail if he had to. He swore Chloe was staying at a hotel and would not let him see the baby ultrasound pictures if he went to prison. I listened to every voicemail. I saved every text message. I forwarded everything directly to Tara. Tara was a shark in a tailored suit. She spent the 2 weeks subpoenaing records, pulling financial disclosures, and tracing every single dollar Jamal had moved through his intricate web of imaginary businesses. She did not just look at the bridge loan, she looked at his entire financial existence for the past 5 years. What she found was a house of cards built on quicksand and funded by deceit. 2 weeks to the day after I walked out of their house, we sat in a sterile, windowless mediation room located on the 14th floor of Tara Downtown Law Firm. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, unflattering glow over the long mahogany conference table. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in front of me. Tara sat to my right, radiating cool professional menace. She had a stack of files beside her that looked heavy enough to crack the table. Across the table sat the remains of the Wilson family hierarchy. Calvin looked as though he had aged 10 years in 14 days. His tailored suit hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and his posture was completely defeated. Vivian sat next to him, her face pale and devoid of her usual expensive makeup. She clutched a shredded tissue in her hands, refusing to make eye contact with me. At the far end of the table sat Jamal. He looked absolutely wrecked. The arrogant entrepreneur was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed shell of a man facing the reality of his own actions. He was bouncing his knee nervously under the table, his eyes darting toward the heavy wooden door as if contemplating a desperate physical escape. They had brought a lawyer. A tired-looking public defender type named Davis who kept nervously adjusting his tie and glancing at Tara with obvious intimidation. Davis cleared his throat, shuffling a small stack of papers from his briefcase. "Well, I suppose we should begin," he said, his voice lacking any real authority. "My clients are prepared to offer a settlement regarding the property on Oakwood Drive. Calvin is willing to acknowledge the Apex Holdings lien, and we have drafted a proposal to begin a repayment structure that will allow the family to remain in the residence while satisfying the debt over a 30-year period." Tara smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator exposing its teeth right before the kill. She placed her hands flat on the table and leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Davis," Tara said, her voice smooth and chilling, "I think there has been a fundamental misunderstanding regarding the purpose of this mediation meeting." Davis frowned, looking confused. "We are here to mediate the foreclosure notice and the eviction terms. My clients are requesting a stay of execution based on familial hardship and extreme financial distress." Tara reached down to the floor and lifted a massive expanding file box onto the table. She opened it and pulled out a stack of documents nearly 3 inches thick. She dropped the stack directly into the center of the table with a heavy, authoritative thud. "We are not here to discuss the house," Tara stated flatly. "The house is a closed matter. The eviction stands and the property will be vacated by the end of the month. The deed is already transferring to my client and the locks will be changed at noon on the 1st. Calvin let out a sharp breath, his hands trembling on the table. "Then why did you call us here?" Tara slid the massive stack of papers across the polished mahogany until it rested directly in front of Davis and Jamal. "We are here to discuss your son," Tara replied, her gaze locking onto Jamal. "We are here to discuss a full forensic audit of Jamal financial accounts. We are here to discuss the $300,000 wire transfer from a predatory private lender. We are here to discuss the forged signatures on federal banking documents." Jamal let out a choked gasp, pushing his chair back from the table, as if the papers were radioactive. Tara tapped the top of the stack. "My client is the primary lien holder on the property Jamal used to secure a fraudulent commercial advance. As a direct result of his fraud, my client asset is now currently tied up in a secondary legal dispute with the bridge lender. This gives us legal standing to pursue damages directly against him." Davis hastily pulled the stack toward him, flipping through the first few pages. His face went completely slack as he realized the sheer volume of evidence Tara had compiled. He looked at Jamal with a mixture of anger and professional despair. "We have traced every dollar," Jamal. Tara continued, her voice echoing in the sterile room. "We know about the shell companies you registered in Wyoming. We know about the falsified tax returns you used to inflate your income. We know about the offshore crypto wallets you used to hide the advance funds from your pregnant wife. We have documented 4 distinct instances of wire fraud, 2 counts of identity theft regarding your father's signature, and 1 massive count of federal bank fraud." Vivian let out a muffled sob, pressing the shredded tissue to her mouth. Calvin just stared straight ahead, looking completely broken and hollowed out. "What do you want?" Jamal asked, his voice cracking. "You took the house. What else do you want from me?" I looked across the table at my brother. I looked at the golden boy who had been handed the world on a silver platter and still felt entitled to steal my plate. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the cool mahogany table. "I want everything, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "I want your total surrender." The sterile silence of the mediation room was no longer just tense, it was vibrating with the impending collapse of every lie Jamal had ever told. Tara did not just present data. She reconstructed a crime scene. She began with the ledger from the secondary bridge lender, then overlaid it with the unauthorized transfers from my parents' personal accounts. She laid out the path of $300,000. It did not go into infrastructure. It did not go into software development. It went into offshore accounts, luxury retail therapy for Chloe, and private jet deposits for trips that had no business purpose. Tara's voice was surgical, stripping away the layers of pretense one by one until there was nothing left but the raw, pathetic math of embezzlement. "When you look at Exhibit C, notice the date." Tara said, her finger pointing at a specific transaction. "This is a withdrawal from your mother retirement fund, Vivian. It occurred 3 days after Jamal bridge loan was finalized. The funds were transferred to a crypto exchange under an alias and then immediately funneled into his personal checking account to cover a defaulted credit card payment he had been hiding from his wife." I watched Vivian's eyes trace the lines of the audit, her breath hitched, turning into a jagged, rhythmic sound of realization. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the lawyer. She looked at Jamal with a dawning horror that was far more potent than any lecture I could have given her. She had spent the last decade convincing herself that she was sacrificing for her son's future, only to find out she was actually subsidizing his spectacular, dishonest decline. Davis, the public defender, tried to interject. "My client had power of attorney. He was simply managing family assets for the greater good of the business." Tara didn't even look at him. She just slid a single page toward him. "That is not power of attorney, counsel. That is unauthorized conversion of funds. The signature on this transfer form matches neither of the parents. I have had it analyzed. It is a digital forgery. If you attempt to use the defense of management, I will simply forward this entire audit to the district attorney's office. Do you really want to make this an active criminal proceeding today? Davis went pale, his mouth snapping shut. He looked at Jamal, who had folded in on himself, his head now hanging between his knees, entirely broken. The audit was a flawless execution of the forensic accounting I had spent the last decade mastering. I had traced every penny, every lie, and every desperate attempt to hide the truth behind layers of misdirection. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten them again. The math was doing all the work for me. Vivian finally dropped the shredded tissue. She looked at the audit, then at the man she had called her golden boy for 30 years. Her hands weren't just shaking. They were clawing at the tabletop, her fingernails leaving faint marks in the polished wood. "You stole from me," Vivian whispered. It wasn't a question. She was stating the fact, her voice devoid of its usual shrillness. It was a flat, dead sound. "You took the money we saved for the house in Florida. You took the money for the grandkids' trust. You took everything." Jamal didn't answer. He couldn't. Calvin had been staring at the far wall, his face a mask of stone. He hadn't said a word since Tara started the breakdown. But as Vivian's realization became audible, his control finally snapped. He reached across the table, his movements swift and uncharacteristic for his age, and grabbed Jamal by the collar of his designer shirt, yanking him upward until their faces were inches apart. "You disgusting, pathetic little rat!" Calvin hissed, the sound raw with a lifetime of wasted pride. "You haven't just ruined our lives. You've humiliated this name. You've used our own savings to feed your delusions. Do you have any idea what this means? Do you have any idea what they do to men like you in prison?" Jamal didn't try to pull away. He just hung there in Calvin's grip, limp and miserable, his face wet with tears that hadn't stopped since the mediation began. Calvin shoved him back, his chair clattering to the floor. Calvin was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, looking around the room as if he were trying to find an exit from the reality he had helped create. He looked at me, his eyes searching for some scrap of the daughter he had dismissed as a checkbook, but he found no mercy in my gaze. I remained unmoved, my posture relaxed, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in front of me. Tara saw the moment. She leaned back, letting the family turn on itself. She waited for the crescendo of shouting to hit its peak before she reached into her file box one last time. She pulled out a single heavy stock document. It was a formal notice of foreclosure, complete with the final court stamp and the signature of the county clerk. She slid it not toward the lawyer, but toward Calvin. "This isn't about your son's personal debt anymore," Tara said. "The default is absolute. This is the notice of foreclosure. The 30-day eviction clock started when the mediation was initiated. You have exactly 15 days left to clear this house. After that, the sheriff will facilitate the removal." The room grew heavy, the air feeling dense and stagnant. The eviction wasn't just a threat anymore. It was an inevitability. The math had caught up to them. The years of unchecked entitlement had finally come to collect their due. My parents had spent their lives building a legacy on top of a foundation of lies, and now they were being forced to live in the wreckage. I stood up, the chair making a crisp sound against the floor. I didn't need to stay for the rest of the arguments. The forensic audit had done its job. The illusion was dead. I looked at the three of them, a broken father, a shattered mother, and a son whose future was rapidly dissolving into legal filings and courtroom deadlines. The audit had shown them who they were, not just to me, but to each other. They were a family of ghosts haunting a house they no longer owned, clinging to a name that no longer commanded respect. I didn't feel triumph, but I did feel the cold, sharp clarity of a final act. I walked toward the door, leaving them to pick up the pieces of their broken, borrowed lives. I knew they wouldn't ask for mercy again, because they finally understood that I didn't have any left to give. When I stepped out of the office building, the mid-afternoon sun hit my face bright and uncompromising. It was the same world I had walked into 2 weeks ago, but the weight of the Wilson family was no longer attached to my shadow. My bank accounts were secure, my reputation as a forensic accountant was sterling, and for the first time my past wasn't something I had to manage or finance. It was simply history. I checked my phone. There were already 12 new notifications, all from the bridge lender trying to settle, and a string of emails from the commercial developer who was now eyeing the property for his own portfolio. I deleted the missed calls from my father, archived the emails, and headed toward my car. The audit wasn't just for them. It was for me, proof that I could dismantle any lie if I was willing to follow the numbers to their final ugly conclusion. I started the engine, leaving the sterile mediation room behind, and for the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel the need to look in the rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed by their expectations. I was finally unequivocally mine. The road ahead was clear. My career was accelerating, and the autonomy I had craved was now my default setting. The Wilson family had spent years teaching me how to be strong, how to be resilient, and how to protect what was mine. They just hadn't realized that the person they were building would eventually be the one to sign their eviction notice. They had wanted a golden child, someone who would keep the secrets and pay the debts. Instead, they had created a ghost hunter who could find every hidden dollar, every falsified record, and every moral failure they thought they had buried in the fine print. I reached my office in silence, enjoying the lack of incoming traffic on my phone. The audit had served its purpose, but the real victory was the quiet drive back. There was no more guilt, no more obligation to maintain a family image that had always been a farce, and certainly no more paying for the privilege of being ignored. I was done financing their delusions. I pulled into my parking spot, the building standing tall and modern in the Nashville skyline, a physical representation of the work I had done with my own hands, funded by my own accounts, and protected by my own strategy. The cycle was officially broken. The 30-day eviction clock was ticking, but the social clock ran out much faster. The Wilson family had spent 3 decades cultivating a flawless image among the suburban elite. They worshipped at the altar of public perception, using their country club memberships and their vaulted sanctuary at the First Presbyterian Church to project an illusion of untouchable wealth. That image shattered precisely 5 days after our mediation meeting. Calvin and Vivian attempted to maintain their routine. They dressed in their Sunday best and walked into the church fellowship hall, acting as if their world was not actively collapsing. They expected the usual deference. They expected the reverent nods and the fawning praise for their entrepreneurial son. But the ecosystem had fundamentally changed. Word travels with lethal speed when a massive commercial loan defaults, and local lenders start whispering about forged signatures and empty collateral. The same aunties who used to corner Jamal at coffee hour to ask for investment advice were now forming tight, impenetrable circles. When Vivian approached them with her practiced smile, the circles did not open to include her. Instead, the women offered stiff, polite greetings before abruptly excusing themselves to speak to someone else. People pointed. Whispers echoed off the stained glass windows. Calvin tried to shake hands with a prominent local judge who simply nodded curtly and walked in the opposite direction. The facade was entirely broken. They were no longer the pillars of the community. They were a cautionary tale. They were the parents of a con artist. The social exile at church was brutal, but the digital execution orchestrated by Chloe was an absolute bloodbath. Chloe did not just pack her designer bags and quietly consult a divorce attorney. She weaponized the collapse of Jamal's fake empire. She officially filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, she had launched a massive coordinated social media campaign. Chloe understood exactly how to play the algorithm, and she cast herself perfectly as the pregnant, betrayed victim of a sociopathic fraud. She sat in the driver's seat of the leased Range Rover, wearing oversized sunglasses and crying perfectly calibrated tears for her 80,000 followers. She uploaded videos detailing exactly how Jamal had drained their joint accounts to fund his failing crypto ventures. She posted screenshots of the eviction notice and the default warnings. She completely dismantled the illusion of Jamal wealth, exposing his designer watches as fakes and his business meetings as desperate ploys for cash. She dragged the Wilson name through the digital mud, ensuring that every single person in their extended social circle knew that Jamal was facing imminent ruin. Her followers ripped him apart in the comments. Jamal was completely paralyzed by the onslaught. His entire network evaporated overnight. His investors blocked his number. His friends stopped returning his texts. He was trapped in a house he no longer owned, waiting for the sheriff to arrive. The combination of becoming a social pariah and facing impending homelessness finally pushed Vivian over the edge of rational thought. But instead of holding her golden boy accountable, she aimed her frantic desperation squarely at the only person who actually had money: me. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of leading a high-level risk assessment meeting at my corporate accounting firm. We were sitting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the downtown skyline, analyzing a corporate merger. My desk phone vibrated with an internal urgent override from the front reception desk. I excused myself, stepping out into the quiet, carpeted hallway to answer the call. It was our head of building security. He sounded incredibly tense. He informed me that a woman claiming to be my mother was currently in the main lobby on the ground floor. He said she was highly agitated, refusing to leave and demanding to be led up to the executive floors. She was creating a massive disturbance. I walked over to the security tablet mounted on the wall near the elevators and pulled up the live camera feed from the ground floor lobby. The high-definition video displayed a scene of absolute chaos. Vivian was pacing wildly in front of the polished marble reception desk. Her hair was unkempt. Her clothes looked as though she had slept in them. She was waving her hands in the air, screaming at the security guards who were trying to calm her down. Even without audio, I could see the wild panic in her movements. She was demanding that I come down immediately. She was demanding that I write a check. She was screaming that I had to pay for a top-tier criminal defense attorney because the walls were closing in on Jamal, and she absolutely refused to let her son face the consequences of his actions. She wanted me to fix it. She expected the human checkbook to open up one last time to save the golden boy from federal prison. Several of my colleagues were standing near the elevator banks watching the spectacle with wide eyes. Clients were pausing in the lobby, staring at the hysterical woman disrupting the professional atmosphere of a premier financial firm. Vivian was perfectly willing to destroy my professional reputation if it meant securing a lifeline for Jamal. She did not care about my career. She only cared about maintaining the illusion that her son was a success. The head of security spoke into my earpiece, asking if I wanted to come down to de-escalate the situation. He offered to escort her to a private room so we could talk away from the clients. I stared at the screen. I watched the woman who had spent 35 years calling me a disappointment, now screaming my name because she needed my money. I felt no guilt. I felt no obligation. I felt absolutely nothing but the cold, clean closure of a balanced equation. Do not let her upstairs. I instructed, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. I will not be coming down to meet her. You are authorized to escort her out of the building immediately. If she resists or refuses to leave the property, you have my full permission to involve local law enforcement. She is trespassing. I stood there and watched the live feed as the situation resolved. Two broad-shouldered corporate security guards stepped forward. They flanked Vivian, taking her gently but firmly by the arms. I watched her face contort in shock as she realized I was not coming to save her. I watched her thrash and protest as they physically guided her toward the heavy revolving glass doors. She was escorted out of the building, completely humiliated, in full view of my colleagues and passing executives. She was deposited onto the downtown sidewalk, staring up at the towering glass skyscraper, realizing that she had permanently lost access to the only daughter who could have saved her. The reality of her choices had finally locked her out. I ended the call and walked back into the glass conference room, taking my seat at the head of the table. I picked up my pen and seamlessly resumed the risk assessment meeting without missing a single beat. My pulse did not even elevate. The emotional manipulation that had controlled me for decades was completely gone. An hour later, the meeting wrapped up. I returned to my private corner office and sat down in my leather chair. I looked out the massive window at the sprawling city below. The 30-day eviction clock was nearly out. The house on Oakwood Drive would be vacant within a matter of days. The title was clear. The asset was secured. The Wilson family legacy was officially liquidated. Just as I reached for my coffee, my private cell phone rang. It was a secure, encrypted line. The caller ID displayed Tara Vance. I answered the call expecting a standard update on the property transfer documents or confirmation that the eviction notice had been executed without incident. Tara did not bother with pleasantries. Her voice was sharp and entirely devoid of its usual sarcastic amusement. The tone immediately commanded my full attention. Maya, we have a major development, Tara stated the words, clipping through the speaker with rapid-fire precision. The secondary bridge lender did not just default the note and initiate a civil suit against Jamal. They realized the depth of the forged collateral disclosures, and they took the entire file straight to the federal authorities. I sat up straight, gripping the edge of my desk. What exactly are you saying, Tara? I am saying the civil matter just became a federal criminal issue, Tara replied. I just received a courtesy call from a contact I have in the Department of Justice. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has officially opened a criminal probe into your brother. They are moving forward with multiple counts of wire fraud and federal bank fraud. The grand jury subpoenas are being drafted as we speak. Jamal is not just losing the house, Maya. He is going to be indicted. Day 28 arrived with the heavy, hollow echo of packing tape ripping across cardboard. The sound reverberated through the empty hallways of the Oakwood Drive house, serving as a constant mechanical reminder that the 30-day eviction clock was about to run out entirely. 48 hours remained until the county sheriff would arrive to change the locks and forcibly remove any occupants still lingering inside. Vivian stood in the center of her massive gourmet kitchen, wrapping a single chipped coffee mug in old newspaper. The grand marble countertops, which had hosted decades of catered holiday parties and country club brunches, were now cluttered with cheap moving boxes and trash bags. The crystal stemware was already gone. The imported Italian dining table had been sold to an estate liquidator for a fraction of its value just to cover the security deposit and first month of rent at their new residence. That new residence was a brutal, stark reality that neither of my parents had fully processed yet. With their credit destroyed by Jamal defaulted loans and their personal savings completely drained by his offshore transfers, they had zero options in their preferred zip code. They had been forced to sign a lease on a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a decades-old complex on the industrial side of the city. The new apartment featured peeling linoleum floors, water-stained popcorn ceilings, and a lingering smell of bleach attempting to mask the scent of old cooking oil. It was exactly the kind of place Vivian used to roll her eyes at when driving past on her way to charity luncheons. Now it was the only roof they could afford. Vivian placed the wrapped mug into a box and stared blankly out the bay window into the manicured backyard. The landscaping service had been canceled weeks ago. The grass was already growing long and unruly. She had spent her entire adult life curating an image of effortless upper-class superiority. She had worn the right clothes, joined the right committees, and proudly presented her son as the ultimate symbol of her successful parenting. That son was currently entirely unreachable. Following Tara's strategic delivery of the forensic audit to the federal authorities, the FBI had moved with terrifying speed. Jamal bank accounts were frozen. His passport was confiscated. He was currently confined to a cheap motel, relying on a court-appointed public defender, because every dollar he had stolen was now locked in federal evidence lockers. Chloe had completely abandoned him, taking their remaining unencumbered assets, and launching a relentless daily social media campaign that painted Jamal as a master manipulator who had conned his innocent pregnant wife. Jamal was fighting for his actual freedom, leaving his parents to face their homelessness completely alone. In the formal living room, Calvin was experiencing the total collapse of his patriarchal authority. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the ghost outlines of furniture that had already been hauled away. For 30 years, this room had been his sanctuary. This was where he sat in his leather recliner dispensing judgment and dictating the rules of our family. This was where he had repeatedly told me that I needed to understand my place. This was where he had handed Jamal the keys to the kingdom. Now the room was just an empty box of drywall and echoing hardwood. Calvin looked at his hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. He had spent the last 27 days trying to find a loophole, a legal maneuver, or an old business contact who would grant him a predatory loan to save the house. He had called every favor he had ever earned. He had swallowed his pride and begged the men he used to golf with for a lifeline. Every single door had slammed shut in his face. The social contagion of federal wire fraud was absolute. Nobody wanted their name attached to Calvin Wilson while his son was being actively investigated by the Department of Justice. The community had exiled them with brutal efficiency. Calvin walked over to a stack of moving boxes near the front door. He leaned heavily against the wall, his chest rising and falling in shallow, defeated breaths. He looked at the heavy oak front door. He knew that in 2 days, deputies in uniform would walk through that door and order him off the property. The absolute finality of his defeat washed over him. The anger and the blustering pride that had fueled him during the mediation meeting were completely burned out. There was nothing left but raw, pathetic desperation. With shaking fingers, Calvin reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He stared at the screen for a long time, watching his lock screen illuminate. He opened his contacts and scrolled past the disconnected numbers of his former friends and the silent number of his indicted son. He pressed the call button next to my name. 15 miles away, in the pristine, climate-controlled environment of my corner corporate office, my desk phone vibrated. I was in the middle of reviewing a complex quarterly tax projection for a legitimate international logistics client. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting bright, clean geometric lines across my polished glass desk. My professional world was perfectly ordered, entirely rational, and completely under my control. I looked down at the vibrating phone. The caller ID glowed with 2 words, Calvin Wilson. I did not reach for the receiver. I did not hit the decline button. I simply leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, folded my hands in my lap, and watched the screen light up. I let it ring. The vibration buzzed against the glass surface, sending a low, rhythmic hum through the quiet office. It rang 4 times. Then the screen went dark. A second later, a small icon appeared indicating a new voicemail message. I picked up my pen and considered ignoring the message entirely. I had work to do. I had a multi-million-dollar account to balance. But the forensic accountant in me demanded that I review every piece of data before closing a file. I tapped the screen, entered my passcode, and pressed play. I placed the phone flat on the desk, letting the speakerphone amplify the sound into the quiet room. There was a long, heavy pause filled with the sound of static and ragged breathing. Then, Calvin's voice filled my office. Maya, please do not delete this, please. It is your father. His voice cracked immediately. It was a jarring sound. I had never heard Calvin Wilson cry. I had seen him angry. I had seen him arrogant. I had seen him dismissive. But the man on the recording was weeping. It was the wet, choking sound of a man who had reached the absolute bottom of his existence. We are packing the dining room, Maya, Calvin continued, his words stumbling over each other. We have nowhere to put the dining table. The new apartment is so small. It is so dirty, Maya. We cannot live there. Your mother has not stopped crying for 3 days. She is sick with panic. We have nothing. Jamal is gone. He will not answer our calls, and his lawyer says he might take a plea deal that puts him away for a decade. We are entirely alone. Another jagged breath hissed through the speaker. I stared at the phone, my expression perfectly neutral. I am calling to beg you, Maya. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Please call your lawyer. Please stop the sheriff. Give us 3 months. Just 3 months to figure something out. You have made your point. You took the house. You exposed Jamal. You won. Please do not put us on the street. The weeping intensified, turning into a pathetic, desperate keen. Then came the confession. The words I had waited my entire life to hear, but now held absolutely no value. I know we were wrong, Maya. I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. We favored him because he was the boy. He carried the name. I thought he was the future of this family. I thought he was going to build an empire. And you. We just thought you would always be there to handle things. You were always so quiet and capable. You never demanded our attention, so we stopped giving it to you. We took your stability for granted. We used you to fix the cracks in the foundation, and we never thanked you for it. We were blind. We were foolish. I see it now. You are the strong one. You are the successful one. Please, Maya, have mercy on us. Show us the mercy we never showed you. Call me back. Please call me back." The recording clicked and ended, leaving a profound, heavy silence in my office. I sat perfectly still, listening to the hum of the central air conditioning. I felt a sudden tightening in my chest. It was a sharp, unexpected pang of grief. It rose up quickly, catching me slightly off guard. But the grief was not for the weeping, broken man on the recording. The grief was not for Vivian wrapping chipped mugs in old newspaper. The grief was for the little girl I used to be. The girl who had worked so hard to get perfect grades, hoping her father would look at her the way he looked at Jamal. The girl who had saved her allowance to buy her mother a birthday gift only to have it tossed aside. I grieved for the illusion of a family I had chased for 2 decades. That little girl would have done anything to hear that apology. She would have moved mountains to save them. She would have paused the eviction, paid the debts, and sacrificed her own future just to hear Calvin Wilson finally admit that she was the strong one. But that little girl did not exist anymore. They had systematically destroyed her year by year, lie by lie, until there was nothing left but a woman who understood the exact mathematical cost of their conditional love. Calvin was not apologizing because his conscience suddenly demanded it. He was apologizing because his preferred strategy had failed. He was apologizing because the golden boy had crashed and burned, and the scapegoat was the only one holding a checkbook. It was not a revelation of character. It was a tactical pivot born of absolute desperation. He was trying to negotiate a settlement using emotions he did not actually feel. I reached forward and picked up my phone. I tapped the screen, bringing up the voicemail menu. I did not save the message to play it again later. I did not forward it to my lawyer for a laugh. I tapped the delete icon. The message vanished from the server, permanently erased from existence. I picked up my pen and pulled the client tax projection back to the center of my desk. The numbers were clean, orderly, and entirely honest. I looked down at the spreadsheet, my mind completely clear and my focus absolute. Mercy is for people who show remorse before they get caught. I began to write. 48 hours later, the morning sun rose over Oakwood Drive without an ounce of pity. It was day 30. The legal clock had officially expired at midnight, and the eviction notice was now a fully actionable court order. I sat in the passenger seat of Tara's sleek black sedan, following the steady pace of 2 marked county sheriff cruisers. We drove through the towering stone gates of the subdivision, passing the sprawling estates and manicured lawns that my parents had used to define their self-worth for decades. We turned the final corner and pulled up to the property. The visual reality of their collapse was staggering. The front lawn of this house was entirely covered in a chaotic sprawl of cheap moving boxes and bulging black trash bags. The pristine Bermuda grass was being crushed beneath the weight of discarded memories and excess possessions that simply would not fit into a low-income industrial park apartment. A velvet armchair sat abandoned near the curb, looking absurd and pathetic in the harsh daylight. A stack of expensive porcelain plates rested precariously on top of a plastic tote bag. It was the frantic, uncoordinated mess of people who had spent their entire lives pretending they would never face a reckoning. Calvin was sitting on the top step of the front porch. He was wearing his usual tailored slacks and a button-down shirt, but the shirt was untucked and deeply wrinkled. His shoulders were slumped forward, and his hands hung loosely between his knees. He was staring blankly at the asphalt of the driveway, completely unresponsive to the world around him. He did not look up when the sheriff cruisers parked at an angle across the end of the driveway. He did not blink when the heavy car doors slammed shut. He was a hollowed-out shell of a man entirely broken by the mathematical certainty of his own failure. Tara and I stepped out of her vehicle. The gravel crunched loudly beneath my heels as I walked up the driveway, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. The air was tense and quiet. Vivian emerged from the front door carrying a stack of framed family photographs. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the uniforms. Her hair was unkempt, and the deep circles under her eyes spoke of days without sleep. When her gaze shifted from the deputies to me, her face twisted into a mask of pure venomous hatred. She clutched the picture frames tightly to her chest, but she did not say a word. She knew she had absolutely no leverage left. The lead deputy stepped forward, resting his hand casually on his duty belt. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson," the deputy said, his voice loud and authoritative. "The 30-day period has expired. This property is now under the legal possession of Apex Holdings. You are required to vacate the premises immediately. Any items left behind will be considered abandoned property. We are here to facilitate your exit and secure the residence." Calvin slowly lifted his head. He looked at the deputy, then slowly turned his gaze to me. There was no anger left in his eyes, just a vast, echoing emptiness. He nodded once slowly and pushed himself up from the concrete step. Before Vivian could open her mouth to argue, the heavy silence of the neighborhood was violently shattered. The harsh screech of tires echoed down the street. A dented gray rental sedan came tearing around the corner, taking the turn far too fast. The car swerved wildly up the driveway, jumping the curb and crushing a row of manicured azalea bushes before slamming to a halt just inches from the sheriff cruiser. The driver's side door flew open, and Jamal stumbled out. The transformation was shocking. The arrogant, polished entrepreneur who used to strut across this very lawn in custom suits and imported leather shoes was entirely gone. Jamal was wearing a rumpled hooded sweatshirt and sweatpants. He was sweating profusely despite the cool morning air. His face was pale, his eyes were bloodshot and darting wildly around the yard. He smelled of stale fear and cheap motel soap. He looked like a man who had spent the last 3 days running from a ghost he could not outpace. He ignored the police officers. He ignored our father standing frozen on the steps. He ignored our mother, who had suddenly dropped the picture frames, shattering the glass across the porch. Jamal locked his frantic eyes on the front door of the house and began sprinting up the walkway. I stepped forward, placing myself directly in the center of the doorway. I squared my shoulders and blocked his path. "Move!" Maya Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He reached out as if to shove me aside, but hesitated when the 2 deputies instinctively stepped up behind me. "I need to get inside. I just need 5 minutes in my old room. Move out of the way." "You do not live here, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly level and cold. "Nobody lives here anymore. The property belongs to my firm and you are trespassing." "You do not understand," he pleaded, dancing from foot to foot, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "I left something. I forgot something important. There is a loose floorboard in the back of my old bedroom closet. There is a fireproof safe underneath it. I need the safe, Maya." He was so consumed by panic that he was completely ignoring the reality of his audience. He was standing in front of 2 sworn law enforcement officers, and he was unspooling his own secrets. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him sweat more. "What is in the safe, Jamal?" "Cash?" he blurted out, running a trembling hand over his face. "It is cash. It is the last of the operational funds. It is the investor money Chloe did not know about. I need it. My accounts are totally frozen. My lawyer will not even return my calls unless I give him a retainer, and I cannot access the offshore wallets without the digital keys. The keys are in the safe. Maya, please. You took the house. You exposed the bridge loan. Just let me have the safe so I can hire a defense attorney. They are going to put me in a federal penitentiary." The confession hung in the crisp morning air, absolute and undeniable. He had just admitted to hoarding stolen investor cash in a hidden floorboard safe. Tara stepped forward from the bottom of the porch stairs. She looked at the lead deputy and gave a small confirming nod. The deputy reached for his radio, pressing the button on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We have a positive identification on Jamal Wilson at the Oakwood address. Please confirm the status of the federal warrant." A moment later, the radio crackled. "Unit 4 federal warrant is active and confirmed. FBI field office has requested immediate detainment for wire fraud and bank fraud." Jamal's eyes went wide. He looked at the radio, then at the deputies, then at me. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. There was no safe exit. There was no magical business deal that was going to save him. The reality he had spent years avoiding had finally caught up and tackled him to the ground. He turned and bolted toward the rental car, but he did not make it 3 steps. The 2 deputies moved with practiced, brutal efficiency. They grabbed Jamal by the arms, twisting him forcefully around. Jamal let out a high-pitched scream of terror, struggling against their grip, but his soft luxury lifestyle had not prepared him for physical resistance. The deputies drove him face down into the grass, the very same grass where he used to pose for promotional photographs and boast about his imaginary real estate empire. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed loudly across the lawn. Calvin collapsed back onto the porch step, burying his face in his hands. He was sobbing silently, his shoulders shaking as he watched his only son, his golden boy, being read his Miranda rights while pinned to the dirt. Vivian completely lost her mind. She lunged forward, trying to push past the deputies, but Tara firmly blocked her path, holding up a hand to keep her back. Vivian fell to her knees on the concrete walkway. She looked at Jamal writhing in the grass, and then she looked up at me, standing perfectly still in the doorway of the house I now owned. Her face was twisted into an expression of absolute profound agony. "You destroyed this family!" Vivian screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet suburban street, raw and hysterical. "You destroyed us, Maya. You destroyed everything. You—" The heavy metal door of the police cruiser slammed shut with a definitive mechanical thud that cut right through the crisp morning air. It was the sound of a cage closing. It was the sound of reality finally catching up to 30 years of unchecked entitlement. Jamal pressed his face against the reinforced glass of the back window. His eyes were wide with a primal animal terror. He looked small. He looked fragile. He looked exactly like what he had always been underneath the designer suits and the leased luxury cars. He was a fraud, and the entire neighborhood was watching him burn. The flashing red and blue lights of the sheriff vehicles painted the manicured lawns of Oakwood Drive in harsh, alternating colors. The flashing lights bounced off the cheap cardboard moving boxes scattered across my front yard. The flashing lights illuminated the velvet armchair sitting pathetically near the curb. The spectacle had drawn an audience. I looked down the street and saw the absolute destruction of my parents' social empire happening in real time. Mrs. Gable, the president of the homeowner association, was standing at the edge of her driveway. She was holding her morning coffee perfectly still, her mouth slightly open in shock. Mr. Sterling, the managing director of the country club, was pausing his morning jog, staring openly at the federal arrest taking place on the pristine grass. The same people who used to invite Calvin and Vivian to exclusive charity galas were now bearing witness to their criminal ruin. The same aunties who used to praise Jamal's business acumen at Sunday church service were now watching him sit in the back of a squad car in sweatpants. They watched the golden boy fall. They watched the heir apparent get handcuffed. They watched the untouchable son become a federal inmate. The social execution was absolute. The prestige was gone. The respect was gone. The Wilson name, which Calvin had wielded like a weapon my entire life, was now completely synonymous with a federal indictment. Vivian was kneeling on the concrete walkway, completely shattered. The polished, elegant woman who had spent decades cultivating a flawless suburban facade was pulling at her own hair. Her expensive makeup was smeared with tears and sweat. Her designer blouse was stained with dirt from where she had thrown herself onto the lawn trying to stop the deputies. She beat her fists against her thighs, her chest heaving with violent, hysterical sobs. "You destroyed this family!" Vivian screamed again, her voice cracking and echoing down the quiet street. "You destroyed us, Maya." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not offer her a hand to help her up from the concrete. I walked slowly down the porch steps, the sound of my heels striking the stone with calm, measured precision. I stopped right in front of her, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire existence making me feel like a financial burden. I looked at my mother, sobbing on the grass. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I spoke with absolute chilling clarity. "I didn't destroy anything, Mom." I said the words slicing through her hysteria like ice. "I just stopped funding your illusions." Vivian gasped, looking up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. She opened her mouth to argue, but I did not let her speak. I stopped funding the illusion that your son was a genius. I continued, my voice echoing off the brick facade of my house. I stopped funding the illusion that you earned this lifestyle. I stopped funding the illusion that you were superior to everyone else on this street. You built a kingdom on stolen money and forged signatures. You built an empire on secondary bridge loans and drained retirement accounts. I didn't destroy this family. The math destroyed this family. The math simply caught up to the lies. She stared at me, her jaw trembling, unable to form a coherent sentence. She wanted the scapegoat back. She wanted the quiet, obedient daughter who would absorb her insults and balance the family checkbook. But that daughter had been eradicated, replaced by a forensic accountant who knew exactly how to track every stolen dime. I stepped around her, leaving her weeping on the walkway, and walked toward Calvin. Calvin was still sitting on the top step of the porch. The patriarch of the Wilson family had not moved a single muscle since the handcuffs clicked around Jamal's wrists. He was staring blankly at the driveway, his face entirely devoid of color. The blustering, authoritarian anger he had carried for 30 years had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, exhausted old man. He looked at the moving boxes. He looked at the police cruisers pulling away from the curb, taking his legacy to a federal holding cell. He slowly lifted his eyes to meet mine. He looked utterly defeated. The voicemail he had left me, the desperate, weeping apology, was hanging in the air between us. He had asked for mercy. He had begged for 3 more months. He had finally admitted that they used me because I was capable while they coddled Jamal because he carried the name. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope. I held it out toward him. Calvin stared at the envelope, his hands shaking as he slowly reached up to take it. He looked at the crisp white paper as if it were a razor blade. "Those are the keys to your new apartment, Calvin," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "It is Unit 4B in the Industrial Park Complex." He swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet morning air. He clutched the envelope tightly. "I paid the security deposit." I continued, standing tall over him. "I paid the first month of rent. The water is turned on. The electricity is turned on. You have exactly 30 days of guaranteed shelter. 1 month, Calvin. 1 month of water. 1 month of electricity. 1 month of a roof over your head." Calvin looked down at the keys inside the envelope, his shoulders shaking with silent, suppressed weeping. "After that 30 days, you are entirely on your own," I stated, laying out the absolute finality of our arrangement. "I am blocking your numbers. I am instructing my corporate security to deny you entry to my office building. Tara has already drafted a cease and desist order regarding any future financial requests. You will not ask me for legal fees for Jamal. You will not ask me for grocery money. You will not ask me to fix the broken foundation of a life you chose to build on fraud. The Bank of Maya Wilson is permanently closed." He didn't argue. He didn't puff out his chest and threaten to drag me through the courts. He simply nodded his chin, dropping toward his chest in total surrender. I looked at the two of them one last time, my mother weeping in the dirt, and my father broken on the steps. I felt a brief, sharp pang of grief somewhere deep in my chest. I grieved for the parents I should have had. I grieved for the childhood I had spent trying to earn a love that was always meant for someone else. But I did not let the grief change my posture. Mercy is for people who show remorse before they get caught. They were only sorry because the money had finally run out. I turned my back on them. I walked up the remaining steps, crossing the threshold of the massive oak front door. The house was quiet inside, cleared of their heavy furniture, and stripped of their oppressive expectations. It felt completely empty and incredibly clean. I stepped inside the foyer, feeling the cool, polished hardwood beneath my feet. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door and pulled it shut. The heavy oak slammed into the frame, severing my connection to the Wilson family forever. I reached up and turned the deadbolt. The lock clicked into place with a loud final snap, echoing through the silent halls of my new home. The heavy oak door remained locked. For 2 entire months, I did not allow a single member of the Wilson family to cross that threshold. The silence in the house during those first few weeks was absolute, but it was soon replaced by the violent, beautiful symphony of destruction. I hired the most aggressive demolition crew in the city. I gave the foreman a single overarching directive. I wanted every trace of my parents completely eradicated from the property. Tearing down the walls felt like performing a localized exorcism. I stood in the center of the living room wearing a dust mask and safety glasses, watching as workmen swung heavy sledgehammers into the drywall. Vivian had spent a fortune on custom floral wallpaper and imported Italian plaster. I watched it all turn into fine white powder and chunks of debris. The massive crystal chandelier in the foyer, which my mother used to meticulously polish before every society dinner, was unceremoniously dropped into a commercial dumpster in the driveway. The heavy velvet drapes that had blocked out the sunlight for decades were ripped from their brass rods. Calvin dark mahogany wood paneling in his home office was stripped away, exposing the bare wooden studs underneath. The custom-built bookshelves where he displayed his golf trophies and framed photos of Jamal were smashed into kindling. With every swing of a hammer and every screech of a pry bar peeling up the expensive hardwood floors, I felt a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. The suffocating atmosphere of conditional love and constant criticism was being physically dismantled. I was not just renovating a piece of real estate. I was systematically dismantling the psychological prison I had grown up in. The most satisfying demolition occurred on the second floor. Jamal had occupied the master suite. Calvin and Vivian had actually given their golden boy the largest bedroom in the house, complete with a custom walk-in closet and a private balcony. The contractors brought in industrial saws to cut through his custom raised platform bed. It was during the dismantling of Jamal's sprawling closet that the renovation took a sudden and highly lucrative turn. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The air conditioning was shut off, and the house smelled of sawdust and raw pine. The foreman walked down the stairs and found me reviewing tile samples on a folding table in the gutted kitchen. He wiped sweat from his forehead and asked me to follow him upstairs. He said his crew had hit a snag while pulling up the subfloor in the master suite. I followed him up the bare wooden staircase. In the far corner of Jamal's closet, 3 thick floorboards had been carefully pried up. The FBI had already confiscated the steel safe Jamal had been screaming about on eviction day, but federal agents are often in a hurry. They had missed the secondary cavity. Beneath the insulation, Jamal had hollowed out a space directly between the floor joists. Inside that cavity sat a heavy waterproof canvas document bag. I knelt on the dusty floor and unzipped the heavy canvas. Jamal had always been arrogant, but I never realized just how sloppy his arrogance had made him. The bag was packed tight with physical evidence. There were stacks of forged property appraisals with the authentic signatures cut and pasted from other documents. There were fake bank statements designed to show liquidity that never existed. But the most damning items were the physical ledgers. Jamal had kept handwritten notes tracking the flow of stolen investor capital into offshore cryptocurrency wallets. He had meticulously documented his own fraud, complete with routing numbers, passcodes, and the names of the specific shell companies he had used to launder the cash. He had written out his entire criminal conspiracy in his own careless handwriting. I sat back on my heels staring at the waterproof bag. Jamal had built a massive house of cards and kept the blueprints hidden under his shoes. This was the exact evidence the federal investigators needed to prove premeditation and intent. This was the difference between a slap on the wrist, white-collar plea deal and a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. I did not feel a single ounce of familial loyalty. I did not hesitate. I did not consider calling Calvin or Vivian to negotiate terms or offer them a chance to save their son. I walked out to my car and placed the canvas bag in the trunk. I called Tara immediately. She answered on the second ring. I told her I had found something during the demolition that the Department of Justice would be extremely interested in seeing. Tara drove straight to the house. We stood in the driveway leaning against the trunk of my car as she reviewed the ledgers. Even Tara, who had spent a decade navigating complex corporate litigation, let out a low whistle of absolute disbelief. We did not wait for subpoenas. We drove directly to the federal building downtown. Tara used her connections to secure an immediate meeting with the lead prosecutor handling the Wilson wire fraud indictment. We sat in a sterile conference room with a recording device running and handed over the canvas bag. The prosecutor flipped through the handwritten ledgers and the forged appraisals. His eyes lit up with the predatory gleam of a lawyer who had just been handed an unlosable case. The prosecutor looked at me across the steel table and asked if I understood exactly what these documents meant for my brother. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I understood perfectly. 3 days later, the news broke on the local business channels. The federal grand jury had returned a superseding indictment against Jamal, adding 24 new counts of aggravated identity theft and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The legal analysts on television confidently predicted that with the new physical evidence, Jamal would face upwards of 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. The golden boy was permanently grounded, and his legacy was secured behind iron bars. With Jamal's fate sealed, I poured all of my remaining energy into the final phase of the renovation. The transformation took another 6 weeks of relentless, round-the-clock work. When the final coat of paint dried and the construction dust was swept away, the Oakwood Drive property was entirely unrecognizable. It was a stunning modern masterpiece. The oppressive dark woods and heavy traditional trims were completely gone. I had opened up the entire first floor, creating a massive flowing living space flooded with natural light from new oversized windows. The kitchen now featured sleek minimalist white cabinetry and a massive waterfall edge quartz island. The walls were painted in crisp gallery white, serving as a blank canvas rather than a monument to the suffocating past. The master suite where Jamal had hoarded his stolen cash was transformed into a serene spa-like retreat with floating vanities and a frameless glass shower. Every single square inch of the house had been sanitized, upgraded, and modernized. The house no longer belonged to Calvin and Vivian. The house belonged to the future. I invited the top luxury real estate agent in the county to walk through the finished property. She stepped through the custom glass front door and audibly gasped. She spent an hour examining the high-end finishes, the imported light fixtures, and the seamless open concept design. We stood in the center of the sunlit kitchen, and she handed me a comprehensive market analysis. She told me that the inventory for modern turnkey luxury homes in this specific zip code was historically low. She confidently stated that the house would fetch top dollar, sparking a massive bidding war within hours of hitting the market. The valuation she presented was astronomical. It was nearly double what the property had been worth when Vivian and Calvin lived there. I took a sleek silver pen from my bag and signed the exclusive listing agreement right there on the quartz island. I did not want to live in this house. I had never intended to keep it. The property was just another asset to be liquidated. I walked out the front door and locked it for the very last time. The real estate agent pounded a heavy wooden for sale sign into the pristine front lawn, serving as a final tombstone for the Wilson family legacy. The emotional dead weight of my childhood had been completely gutted, renovated, and monetized. I walked to my car without looking back, ready to sever my final tie to the past. The listing went live on a Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. By Thursday afternoon, my real estate agent had to disable her automated scheduling software because the sheer volume of showing requests was crashing the system. The Oakwood Drive property was no longer a decaying monument to suburban ego and financial fraud. It was a flawless modern triumph. The high-definition aerial photography highlighted the manicured grounds, the newly poured concrete driveway, and the pristine white exterior. It was the most viewed property in the county for 5 consecutive days. The bidding war began on Monday. The offers poured in from wealthy tech executives and out-of-state investors. Nobody asked for seller concessions. Nobody requested an inspection contingency. It was a feeding frenzy of cash buyers trying to outmaneuver one another. By Wednesday evening, I accepted an all-cash offer that was 40% over our aggressively high asking price. The financial return on my renovation investment was astronomical. The Wilson family home had finally achieved the actual value Calvin had always pretended it possessed. 14 days later, I sat in a plush leather chair in the primary conference room of a downtown title agency. The room was freezing cooled by a massive commercial air conditioning unit that hummed steadily in the background. The massive mahogany conference table reflected the recessed lighting above. I held a heavy silver pen, systematically signing my name and initialing the bottom corner of dozens of legal documents. With every stroke of the pen, the property moved further away from my history and closer to complete liquidation. Tara sat in the chair next to me. She was wearing a sharp charcoal blazer and holding a thick manila folder in her lap. She waited patiently while the escrow officer organized the final stack of disclosures. "While we wait for the wire transfer to clear the Federal Reserve," Tara said, keeping her voice low and perfectly modulated, "I thought you might appreciate a final status report. I had my team do a routine follow-up on the outstanding variables just to ensure our liability is permanently closed." I set the silver pen down on the polished wood. I folded my hands in my lap and gave her a slight nod. "Jamal was sentenced yesterday morning," Tara stated, opening the manila folder and sliding a printed court docket across the table. "The federal judge did not offer any leniency. The physical ledgers you found in the floorboards gave the prosecutors an airtight timeline of premeditated fraud. Jamal was convicted on all counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. He received a 15-year sentence in a federal correctional institution. There is no parole in the federal system. He will serve every single day of that sentence." I looked down at the court document. I felt my pulse beat steadily in my wrists. 15 years. Jamal would be nearly 50 years old by the time he walked out of a prison gate. His entire youth, his entire imagined empire was gone. And his wife? I asked, my voice perfectly level. "Chloe absolutely eviscerated him in family court," Tara replied, a faint smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "She filed for emergency sole custody and secured it within 48 hours. She leveraged his federal conviction to strip him of any parental rights. She successfully petitioned for child support algorithms based on his previous fabricated income statements, meaning he will exit prison with a mountain of uncollectible domestic debt. Furthermore, she completely weaponized her social network. She branded herself as the ultimate survivor of a sociopathic con artist. She kept her luxury lifestyle and completely alienated him from every high society contact they ever shared. He is entirely isolated." I nodded slowly, absorbing the absolute precision of Chloe revenge. She had played the game far better than Jamal ever could. "What about Calvin and Vivian?" I asked, looking back up at Tara. Tara flipped to the second page in her folder. She smoothed the paper with her perfectly manicured hand. "I hired a private investigator just to verify they had completely vacated the county jurisdiction. I needed to ensure they would not pose a physical nuisance to the new buyers. They are currently residing in the Industrial Park apartment. Their credit is decimated, so they have no mobility." Tara paused, letting the weight of the reality settle over the table. "Calvin is working the overnight shift at a commercial hardware distribution warehouse," Tara continued. "He spends 8 hours a night driving a forklift and loading pallets of lumber. Vivian is working as a frontline greeter at a discount retail store on the highway bypass. She wears a blue polyester vest and stands by the automatic doors, handing out shopping carts to the general public." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. I pictured Vivian, the woman who used to spend thousands of dollars on custom floral arrangements for country club luncheons, standing on a concrete floor in a synthetic vest. I pictured her forcing a smile at the same exact people she used to ignore at the grocery store. I pictured Calvin, the man who used to dictate family policy, from a leather recliner, shivering in a drafty warehouse, manually lifting heavy inventory. The brutal, unforgiving reality of the working class they had always despised was now their permanent existence. The escrow officer walked back into the conference room, breaking the silence. She handed me a crisp white settlement statement. "The wire transfer has officially cleared," she announced with a bright, professional smile. "The funds are currently resting in your primary holding account. Congratulations on a spectacular sale." I looked down at the final number at the bottom of the page. It was a massive, life-changing sum. It was the kind of wealth that Calvin had chased his entire life but had never possessed. I took the final copy of the paperwork and stood up from the mahogany table. I did not feel a rush of malicious joy. I did not feel the bitter vindictive thrill of revenge. I simply felt completely and utterly unburdened. The heavy, suffocating backpack of trauma, guilt, and conditional love that I had carried since childhood had been unbuckled and dropped by the side of the road. I was breathing pure, clean air for the very first time. I walked out of the title office with Tara matching my stride. We stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight. I walked over to my car, unlocked the doors, and placed the settlement folder on the passenger seat. I looked at Tara and extended my hand. She took it, shaking it firmly. "Where to next?" Tara asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. "I am driving to a commercial real estate office in the financial district," I replied, opening my car door. "I have a lease to sign. It is time to get to work." 6 months later, the harsh winter weather had surrendered to a bright, crisp spring. I was sitting behind a massive slab of polished walnut in my new corner office. The room was on the 30th floor of a premier downtown skyscraper. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire city skyline. The morning sunlight poured over the expensive modern furniture, illuminating the thick brass plaque mounted on the heavy glass door in the reception area. The plaque read, "Wilson Forensic Accounting and Financial Advocacy." I had used the massive profits from the sale of the Oakwood Drive house to independently fund my own firm. I had walked away from the corporate logistics accounts and the standard tax projections. I had built a highly specialized agency dedicated entirely to dismantling complex financial fraud. I hired a team of elite investigators and aggressive paralegals. We tracked hidden assets. We broke through offshore shell companies. We audited ghost accounts. More importantly, I established a massive pro bono division within the firm. Half of my staff was dedicated entirely to helping victims of domestic financial abuse. We represented women whose husbands had hidden money, forged signatures, and drained joint accounts. We gave them the exact tactical skills and forensic firepower I had used to dismantle Jamal. We found the hidden cash, we secured their financial independence, and we legally eviscerated their abusers. I had taken the poison of my family history and transformed it into a weapon for justice. My administrative assistant knocked softly on the open office door. She walked in carrying a silver tray with the morning mail and a freshly brewed cup of black coffee. She set the tray on the corner of my walnut desk, gave me a polite smile, and quietly backed out of the room, closing the heavy door behind her. I reached for the coffee, taking a slow, appreciative sip. I sorted through the stack of thick corporate envelopes and legal briefings. Near the bottom of the pile, I found a standard white envelope. It looked cheap. The return address was a post office box located near the industrial park. The handwriting scrawled across the center was shaky, uneven, and painfully familiar. It was from Calvin. I set my coffee mug down. I picked up a sleek silver letter opener from my desk organizer and slid it neatly under the flap. I pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The page was heavily creased, as if it had been folded and unfolded multiple times before being placed in the envelope. I flattened the paper against the walnut desk and began to read. "Maya, I do not know if you will ever read this. I do not expect you to reply. I am writing this on my lunch break at the warehouse. My hands hurt constantly. My back is failing. Your mother is a shadow of the woman she used to be. She cries every night before her shift at the store. The shame has broken her spirit entirely. We lost the appeal for Jamal. He was transferred to a maximum security facility in another state. We do not have the money for a bus ticket to go visit him. We are completely alone." I read the words tracking the absolute physical and emotional destruction of their lives. There was no arrogance left in the ink. There was no blustering pride. "I am writing to tell you that you were right," Calvin continued. "You were right about everything. We built a life on lies, and we forced you to carry the weight of our failures. We stole your childhood. We demanded your obedience, and we gave you absolutely nothing in return. I look back at the way I treated you, and I feel a shame so deep it makes it hard to breathe. You were the only honest thing this family ever produced, and we punished you for it. I am so sorry, Maya. I am sorry for every harsh word, every dismissed accomplishment, and every moment I made you feel like you were not enough. I know we do not deserve your forgiveness. I know we do not deserve your time, but I am asking as a broken old man. Will you ever come visit us? Just once. Just to let me tell you to your face that I was wrong. I read the final line. I read the signature at the bottom. I sat back in my chair and looked at the lined paper. I acknowledged the pain in his words. I acknowledged the total comprehensive defeat radiating from every single syllable. The little girl who used to live inside me, the one who had begged for Calvin approval, would have wept at this letter. She would have grabbed her car keys, driven to that cheap apartment, and forgiven them instantly. But I was no longer that girl. I was no longer the overlooked workhorse. I was no longer the silent bank account for their delusions. I picked up the piece of notebook paper. I stood up from my desk and walked across the thick carpet to the heavy-duty cross-cut paper shredder resting in the corner of the office. I pressed the power button. The machine hummed to life. I held the letter over the metal slot and let go. The mechanical grinding sound was loud and highly efficient. Calvin apology, his desperate plea for absolution, was instantly shredded into thousands of tiny, unreadable fragments of confetti. I walked over to the sleek bar cart resting against the far wall. I picked up a heavy crystal decanter and poured myself a glass of incredibly expensive imported red wine. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window. The morning sun was reflecting off the glass towers of the city below. Millions of people were rushing through the streets, navigating their own complex lives. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. The taste was rich, dark, and complex. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I was independent. I was wealthy. I was completely unburdened by the ghosts of Oakwood Drive. The cycle of abuse was permanently broken. I stood alone at the top of the world, perfectly content and entirely free. I smiled confidently, looking out over the skyline as the bright morning light filled the room.